7/12/1983. Undisclosed location. Gateway to the Mind. Sensory deprivation experiment. Our goals. Our goals for this experiment uses sensory deprivation to perceive the presence of God. Our theory states that the five senses cloud our perception of the otherworldly, and without them, a human could establish a connection with God through thoughts. Our test subject. For this experiment, our test subject was purged of all his senses, so he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. Our test subject had no possible way to sense the outside world, and was left with only his thoughts. Audio and visual monitoring. Our scientists have developed a way of monitoring a person's thoughts. They have electronic signals sent from a computer to enter a person's brain and exit back into the computer. The signals are then converted into images and audio waves for the scientists to see. Gateway to the Mind. Audio and visual monitoring. Day 1. Audio monitoring. Day 1. Not applicable. Image monitoring. Day 1. Not applicable. Experiment Day 1 conclusion. Nothing out of the ordinary was shown on the audio and visual monitor. The experiment continues. Day 2. Audio monitoring. Image monitoring. Experiment Day 2 conclusion. The audio and visual monitoring suggests that our test subject has reached contact with otherworldly beings. We are one step closer to God. Day 3. Audio monitoring. Image monitoring. Experiment Day 3 conclusion. According to the audio and visual monitoring, our test subject has made contact with the damned in hell. Contact with God is in sight. I can't see, I can't feel, I can't smell, I can't taste. Their voices are so loud. Their screams are louder. No heaven, no forgiveness. No heaven, no forgiveness. No heaven, no forgiveness. Day 4. Audio monitoring. Image monitoring. Experiment Day 4 conclusion. Our test subject has sadly passed away, but before he passed, he said this: I have spoken with God. He has abandoned us. Yeah, I mean, God was gonna talk to you, but then he saw you got a poor old man of all his senses, strap him to a dentist chair, and stab HDMI cables in his nose, ears, eyes, and mouth, so he decided to keep his distance from you sadistic fucks. For those who don't know, this analog horror, Gateway to the Mind, is based off a creepypasta of the same name. In the creepypasta, we only get the man's reaction to what he could see, and not the things he was experiencing himself. This is an interesting contrast, and I enjoy getting to see the horrific things his mind was put through, because there's something wrong with me. This creepypasta may also help us more deeply understand the media in the days. The days don't line up, but some of the information may correspond. The subject's experience in the creepypasta goes a little something like this. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking with him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but were not convinced until the subject started naming their dead relatives and repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known.
Do you see my ex-husband in there? Is he in hell?
No!
Fuck!
After a week, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days, until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. A day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point, he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness." For 5 hours straight, he continually begged to be killed. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientist rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to the table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as the teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with the scientist for the first time in the study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us," and his vital signs stopped.
Since God has abandoned me, there is no one to answer for what I'm about to do.
Now, that's all well and good, but what does that actually tell us about the information in the analog horror?
Let's go day by day, shall we?
On day 2, the audio log sounds like a mix of scared babbling and crying, but I can't make out anything she's saying specifically. If anything is clear to any of you about what they're saying, feel free to comment below. But whatever she's saying,
It sounds distressed.
perhaps these are the deceased that the subject spoke with in the creepypasta. The first image contains a naked, bald, alien-like woman with what looks like a set of eagle wings. How do I get the man with no senses to know that I want to be introduced to his hot brain friend? Perhaps she's a statue, as the tone and texture of the skin on both the body and the wings looks vaguely metallic. Maybe an angel? On day 3, the sound was static and chaotic. Sounds like a lot of winds, and potentially moaning and screaming?
I just call that Tuesday, if you know what I mean.
Everything is so distorted that it's impossible to determine what is actually making those sounds. But whatever is happening, a hell of a lot is happening, giving me serious Gates of Hell vibes. The image depicts that of a man with 2 heads that merge with one another, one being the sun and the other being the moon. I tried Googling it, but I'm still not sure of its significance, so I give up. Let me know if you know in the comments. On day 4, the sound is more chaos and static, indecipherable patterns of noise that slightly resemble speech in speed and tone. The image depicts a humanoid surrounded by a veil of darkness. His facial features exchange for simple black holes, vaguely arranged in the shapes for the associated sense organs. A jagged, sharp face with a jaw that looks like it could cut glass. From the explanations, this is supposed to be God.
God? Pfft, God, my ass.
While I love the story and the video, I have quite a lot of problems with the experiment and the quote-unquote scientists. First off, how the hell do they know it's not just a man who had all of his senses taken away, tripping balls because the world is now dark and silent forever? You put a human being in a sensory deprivation tank for an hour, or a slightly boring room for 5 minutes, they'll start hallucinating. I mean, half the time they go into the woods, they say they've seen a monster, and you're just gonna believe that shit? Okay, even if you can monitor the brain, you'd just be monitoring hallucinations. I'll cop to you. Yeah, he knew that thing about the scientist's relatives. So, let's say you did make contact with something. You just assume it to be God? If someone contacted me through their brain and asked if I was God, the first thing I would do is fuck with them and tell them that I'm God. So yeah, great story and presentation, but in summation, these scientists just tortured an old man to death for no reason. And they all lived happily ever after. The end. If you like this video and want us to come back and check out more analog horror series, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with all notifications enabled, or maybe I'll take away all your senses. Go watch all my other videos too. I'd like to thank Beyond Birth for adapting one of my favorite classic creepypastas into an analog horror in an enthralling way. Shout out the Inner Circle. Love y'all. You better fucking subscribe. I almost threw up making this video.